Psalm 45, as a lot of Christians, they claim that it is about Jesus. Now, let's try to tackle that. Is Psalms 45 really about Jesus? Now, you can read up any standard commentary on Psalm 45, and they will suggest the same thing, that it is a royal wedding song of a Davidic king. Some have suggested that it may be about King Ahab, but certain things don't fit well with his character when compared to how he's depicted or described in the Old Testament. Therefore, the best candidate is said to be a Davidic king like King Solomon. And here are some of the reasons. I also hold the opinion that it is definitely talking about King Solomon. And here are some of the reasons. So first, in verse 2, if we read, it says, "You are the most excellent of men, and your lips have been anointed with grace, since God has blessed you forever." Here we clearly see that he's referred to as a human being, not a divine figure. And he's anointed just as King Solomon would have been anointed in 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 39, or Saul being anointed by Samuel in 1 Samuel chapter 10, or David himself, the father of Solomon, being anointed by God in Psalm chapter 89, verse 20, where God says, "I found David, my servant, with my holy oil I have anointed him," etc. The second verse, if you guys look at, would be verse 5. It talks about a king being triumphant, upholding truth, humility, and justice, etc. It depicts this king defeating his enemies and asserting dominance over other nations. Now, this lines up perfectly with Solomon, as he's described in the 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 21 and 24, where it says that Solomon ruled over all kingdoms from Euphrates to the land of Philistines and to the border of Egypt, and serving i.e. God. It's referring to these kingdoms serving him in all his days with peace and justice. Then verse 6, it says, "Your throne, O God," which is the one that they love to quote, "will last forever and ever. A scepter of justice will be the scepter of your kingdom." As we know from 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 23, King Solomon sat on the throne of Yahweh. The verse says, "So Solomon sat on the throne of Yahweh," i.e. Lord, as king in the place of his father David. He prospered, and all Israel obeyed him. And even if you go to Bible Gateway, and if you scroll over the NIV commentary of this particular verse, it will show you in the footnotes saying, here the king is addressed as God's representative. Additionally, if we see in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 12 to 16, David is promised by God through prophet Nathan that his kingdom will be forever through his offspring. Verse 7 says, "You love righteousness and hate wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has set you above your companions by anointing you with the oil of joy." The verse shows the king has a God, meaning he's not a divine figure himself. God chose him for loving righteousness and hating wickedness. Just like Solomon in 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 9 to 12, who asked God for wisdom, for not selfish gain. God was pleased and made him the wisest king ever, also giving him wealth and honor beyond any other. In 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 12, it says, "No one was like him, and no one like him would come before and after," clearly showing his unique status. Verse 8 says, "All your robes and fragrant with myrrh and aloes and cassia from palaces adorned with ivory, the music of strings makes you glad." This reference to the ivory palace fits Solomon's wealth and luxurious lifestyle perfectly, as is seen in 1 Kings chapter 10, verses 4 to 29. In verse 9, it says, "Daughters of kings are among your honored women. At your right hand is the royal bride in gold of Ophir." This verse indicates him marrying the daughters of other kings, as according to 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 1, he married the daughter of the Pharaoh of Egypt. Once again, Jesus wouldn't fit here, as the king is referred to as being married to multiple women from royal families. Now, there are some explanations from Trinitarians, which we can probably discuss towards the end, that they apply this as a typology to the church, etc. But it doesn't really fit. If you read the entire psalm, it doesn't really fit it doesn't line up with Jesus at all. Certain things you can apply to Jesus metaphorically as a typology, but others do not line up. So there you would have to then special plead. Verse 10 says, "Listen, daughter, and pay careful attention. Forget your people and your father's house." This verse also lines up with Solomon's marriage to the Pharaoh's daughter, as she was also a foreigner and brought by him to the city of David, or could also line up with him marrying women of other nations, as he's said to have married women from all kinds of nations, according to 1 Kings chapter 11. Verse 12 mentions the city of Tyre will come with a gift, people of wealth, will seek your favor. 1 Kings chapter 5, verses 1 to 12 show Solomon had strong ties with Hiram, king of Tyre. Now, Hiram gave him cedar wood and skilled workers to help build the temple and Solomon's palace as well. This would have been a wedding gift or just royal support. But here's the problem. Jesus never received anything. How do you apply this even metaphorically to Jesus? I mean, they could, jump through some hoops and, make this into a typology as well, but it doesn't clearly fit Jesus at all. And lastly, in verses 16 to 17, it says, your sons will take up your... Did I get disconnected? Somebody messaged. No. Okay, never mind. So verses 16 to 17 says, your son will take the place of your fathers. You will make them princess through the land. I will perpetuate your memory through all generations. Therefore, the nations will praise you forever and ever. Once again, we see that it couldn't be alluding to Jesus, as he had no sons. No one inherited his throne. And he never sat on David's throne, but Solomon had a son who inherited his father's throne after Solomon's death, as we can see in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 42 or 43, I think. Now, for those that are interested in digging deeper into these translation challenges, especially in Hebrews, I recommend checking out a book titled Truth in Translation by Jason David B. Dunn. You can easily find a free PDF version of it online. You can copy a physical book if you prefer, but you can, for those that don't want to spend needless money, just download it for free on the internet. So specifically for the issues related to Hebrews 1 and Psalm 45, I suggest reading start from page 98 all the way to 102, where these topics are specifically discussed in detail. Like, for instance, I've highlighted some of those passages for you that you guys need to pay attention to, right? The same technical details that I talked about, those are mentioned here, especially pertaining to verse 8 in Hebrews chapter 1 and Psalm 45. So, for example, on this page, the author explains how challenging it can be to translate certain Greek passages into English or other languages. He notes that Greek often doesn't require helping verbs, so translators have to supply the implied verb based on context, making accurate translations very, very tricky. Now, on these two pages, the author discusses the nominative versus vocative usage that I talked about earlier. On the left side, I don't think I've highlighted anything on there, but you guys can read. There is the mention of the nominative versus vocative. He explains the grammatical distinction, while on the right, where I've highlighted in red, he points out how translations like the KJV, NIV, NASB, etc., they tend to render the phrase in the vocative case without informing the readers of the uncertainty of the translation. The RSV, however, is one of the very few translations. That's why I personally prefer RSV as well. Some people, they prefer ESV, but in the academic circles, RSV, ESV, they both are good. I personally prefer RSV for that reasons. It gives you these footnotes. So it does tell you and does acknowledge in the footnote that there are, it could be rendered differently. Here you can see he talks about how God is addressed nowhere in Psalm 45. Also, how three giants of the New Testament scholarship, Westcott, Moffat, and Goodspeed, reached the same conclusion independently, that a more probable translation should be God is your God is your throne. Sorry, yes, God is your throne, not your throne, O God.